The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hi, welcome to A Discussion With. My name is Bruce Southworth. I'm a mystery book reviewer for Publishers Weekly, a new mystery magazine. And I'm very pleased to have with me today Anne Perry. Anne is the author of two very successful mystery series. The longest-running series features Charlotte and Thomas Pitt, both Victorian period pieces. Her current book is her 14th in the series, and it's called The Hyde Park Headsman. The second series features William Monk, who is a former police inspector who is suffering from amnesia. And the fourth book in that series was published in October of 1993 called A Sudden Fearful Death. Prior to becoming a writer in 1972, I guess it was, you held a variety of jobs including a buyer for a department store, a stewardess, and an insurance underwriter. Quite a collection. But welcome. Glad you're here today.
Thank you very much.
Was 1972, this was one of those facts that I dug up, was that a special year in some way?
No, actually it was your bicentenary year of 76 that was special for me, because after having written without having anything accepted for about 11 or 12 years, my first story that was accepted, which was Cater Street Hangman, the first in the Charlotte and Pitt series, was accepted, and it was published in 78.
In 78?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I was curious if any of those sort of...
It's probably my appalling writing that they couldn't read.
Hard to say, hard to say. I was curious about whether or not writing was something that you had always wanted to do.
Yes,
it sounds like you've been doing that.
There was never anything else I wanted to be but a writer.
Your mother was a teacher, as I understand it.
Well,
did you have,
when my stepfather became seriously ill and he couldn't work anymore, it was necessary for financial reasons for my mother to work. And her only qualification was domestic science, but she started to teach the mentally handicapped, and she taught them domestic science. And I could talk for half an hour at least on what she was able to achieve, but the answer is briefly yes, she taught.
Well, I was curious if there was then a sort of preponderance of books in your house that sort of inspired you.
She didn't start to teach until I was adult and away from home, and it was domestic science she taught. But there were always books in the home, yes, always.
Did any of that sort of odd assortment of jobs that you held, as you were working, writing, have they contributed in any way to?
A lot. They kept body and soul together, but that's about it.
But not as far as the writing that you're doing today?
I don't think so, except that watching and listening to people is always instructive for a writer. Any experience, your own feelings, your observation of other people, it all goes into the back of the mind and comes out in one form or another.
These tours that you're doing, they must be interesting fodder then also, because you meet so many people during the course of the time.
It's enormously encouraging and exciting, because I live in the Scottish Highlands, outside a little village of 500 people, and my nearest town is 10 miles away, and it was founded in 1066, so that tells you how old it is. But I'm not known in Britain, really, worth a darn. Almost all my readers are in the United States, except for Germany, Italy, and Japan, but by far the majority in this country. So for me to come here and meet readers is very exciting, very encouraging, and instead of sitting at home you're scribbling away and sending things off into the wild blue yonder, and I know that they are published because of course the money comes in, but I don't see the readers. When I come here I meet people, and that really is the bottom line. When you meet somebody and they tell you how much they enjoyed what you wrote, that they were moved one way or the other by it, and the world and the people that you have created out of your head and your research seem to them to be real and interesting. That's the biggest reward of all.
Let's step back for a moment. How did you come to create the Charlotte and Thomas Pitt series? Was that sort of your first inspiration, and you went after with that? Or
no, it wasn't. I've been writing straight historical stories for a long time, a lot of years, 11, 12 years, and not succeeding with anything being published. And then my stepfather had an idea for who he thought Jack the Ripper might have been, Member of Parliament. I wasn't particularly interested in that idea, but I was very, very interested in what happens to people, to relationships, under the pressure of investigation of appalling crimes that happen all within one locality. And you think, first of all, well, I've passed the street where that happened. Maybe I saw one of the people involved. Maybe I have seen this man. Maybe he's somebody I know. Maybe he's somebody I know well. Oh God, maybe he's a member of my family. and how relationships fracture and change, and how you have a completely new regard and a new eye for people, and you realize how well you know some people and how well you do not know others. That makes sense. How little you know them.
Sounds like a tremendous springboard for a paranoia.
Yes, for all
increasing.
sorts of things.
Yeah.
And for new relationships developing, old ones crumbling. You know, the husband goes out first thing in the morning and comes back at night and he tells you where he's been, and you never think, well, perhaps he hasn't, until maybe one day he has a tear in his jacket and you say, oh, how did that happen? He tells you. And you discover a couple of days later that that was not so. You think, well, why is he lying to me? How much do I really know this man? And you wouldn't even be moved to such thoughts if it were not that you're frightened and that you know that somebody is doing these terrible things, and somebody who is not, to outward appearances, so very different from everybody else, or they'd have been caught long ago.
Do you find that that a lot of the in the act of some of these very grievous crimes, and the people who are sort of being looked at as possible suspects and whatnot, that there's where am I going with this? That a lot of people could be considered to be guilty of that, and you know that's part of the wide net that the police throw
certainly.
and so on.
And not only guilty of that, but guilty of other things that may not even be crimes. Maybe just sins, foolishness. I mean, how often have you done something which you would really rather other people didn't necessarily know about, not because it's wicked, just because you've made a prat of yourself and you don't want everybody to know, and I certainly have. I've done things that may be not wicked, but perhaps just a little embarrassing, a little grubby, and I thought, well, you know, I wish I hadn't done that quite that way. And I would maybe not lie about it, but at least not tell everybody. And all these pressures of the other things that surface under an investigation, I mean, to me, that's at least half the story. It's just ripping the lid off all sorts of relationships and thoughts and ideas, and what people will do under the pressure of fear, because most of us tend to show a less attractive side when we're frightened. That's when some of the really ugly bits come out. I've heard courage described as grace under pressure. And most of us can be good when the pressure's not on. But when it is, that shows us what we really are. And sometimes it's not what you want to see. But it makes a great story.
It does.
And what people will do to hide it.
One of the things I was intrigued about is the comparative names of each of the series in your stories, whereas the pits are all, you know, they seem to be place-based.
I painted myself into a corner there. By the time I'd done half a dozen, I didn't really feel I could get out of that. I'm not very good at thinking of titles. Well, no, that's not true. I can think of great titles and I write a story and it doesn't fit. I've got half a dozen great titles I've tried to write the story for, and I'm left with a story at the end that doesn't fit the title, and I've got to think of a new title.
That could perhaps explain it in a sense, because it maybe I'm reading too much into it, but on the one hand, all these stories that have the place names, whereas the William Monks seem to have fear and betrayal.
I didn't paint myself into a corner there, so I can, if I can, I'm free to think of all sorts of titles. The next one, coming out in the autumn of '95, is Sins of the Wolf, and I was pleased with that title. It comes from Dante. It's not a quote from Dante, it's from his Inferno. And the one that comes out in '96, you know, all things going all according to plan, is As Cain His Brother, which is a quote. And the one for the, it's 90, this is year 94 for Sins of the Wolf, 95 for As Cain His Brother, 96 for Wade in the Balance. And the next pit for 95 is Traitor's Gate, which I think is nice and evocative.
Yes.
But still definitely a place.
Still definitely. What is the history of Traitor's Gate? Just I know we're digressing a little bit. I've heard of it.
Well, it's the river gate of the Tower of London where traitors were brought in to be executed.
That's right. That's right.
Grisly.
That's wonderful. I was curious if you had any sense or theory as to why these kind of period mysteries seem to be gaining in such great popularity. I mean, there have been some that have been done for some time, you know, ancient Chinese and so on, but now there's Egyptian and Roman, and in this country anyway, there's Civil War and World War I, and even in Los Angeles in the 50s.
I could only guess, and I think it's because a lot of readers like to be informed as well as entertained. And after all, this is not the only interesting age. Almost every age has its glamour and its excitement and its tragedy and its contrasts. And it's a way of travelling in time without the inconvenience of the appalling medicine and plumbing and various other things that afflict.
That you wouldn't want to.
I certainly wouldn't want to. People have asked me, would I like to have lived in the Victorian time? No, thank you. I like to travel there in the comfort of my own home, in front of my fire or with my central heating, my decent armchair, my comfortable clothes, and decent plumbing, and knowing that I can go to a competent doctor if I should need to.
In that light, how do you evoke the Victorian period so well? That's one of the hallmarks of
Thank you.
your writing, is the detail of the
Well,
clothing.
it's not
the
so
detail of the
very
period.
long ago. A tremendous amount is known.
Mm-hmm.
And you can buy very good books on clothing, on household hints, on building, on street life, on crime of the period, on the mental attitudes and emotional beliefs, on the poetry and the writing, street transport, street lighting, public health, almost anything you want to. And what I tend to do is find these books which fascinate me and then think, well, yes, this piece could be used in a story, that piece could be used. Just before I came away, I purchased 2 books, both paperback and very reasonable. One was on Victorian warfare in Africa, colonial warfare, and the other the same but in India. And whilst I was travelling around here, I found quite a small paperback book on Victorian women travellers. And I have all sorts of bits of information I can come up with that I can use, because in a future story, in fact I think it's Traitor's Gate, I bring back Zenobia Gunn, known as Nobby, who was a Victorian woman traveller. Well, if I have her return in the future, I can pick up all sorts of little bits from this book which I can put in, which will be accurate because they're taken from diaries and things.
So your research, how long do you take to research a book? I mean, you have this vast collection.
I used to research very hard and then write the book, and I think I tended perhaps to swamp a little bit with the research. Now I've altered the system with a different publisher, a little more confidence and a little more money, and I can afford to employ a secretary, and I have a word processor. I write my first draft by hand. I can only think with a pen in my hand. Then I dictate it, and she transcribes it onto the word processor. I dictate it because she, like everybody else, including me, can barely read my writing. I mean, it's no shortcoming on her part. And then I read it aloud to my next-door neighbour and dear friend, who's a very, very good constructive critic. Like you, I now lost where I'm going with that one. But I find that if I plan the story, the drama, and write it with as much knowledge as I have, and keep the drama going, then if I need something, I can skip a bit, and when I go through and do the rewrite, then I can put in the research that I need to find. Otherwise, I do tend to think, oh, this is fascinating, and I wind up digressing and lose the impetus of the story. And I think I have a better finished product this way.
Well, perhaps a little bit better balanced, as you say.
Yes.
I remember...
I'm not really a historian. Really, I'm just a storyteller. And somebody who likes to climb on a soapbox.
Is that the thrust of your writing, to tell the story? Or is it also to sort of convey...
To say what I believe. Yes, but I love drama. I love drama, and I love ethical questions. And I like people. And stories are about people, and what they believe, and why they believe it, and what they do, why they do, what hurts, what gives joy.
So, again, it's kind of that interplay that is really what is most intriguing.
Yes. Yes.
I read somewhere that one of the things that fascinated you about the Victorian period was the hypocrisy of the various layers.
Well, it makes such a good mystery, doesn't it?
Oh, indeed.
I mean, if everybody's going to tell the truth all the time, your detective hasn't got much of a job. But if it's necessary to cover up and conceal all sorts of things to preserve your reputation and to preserve your sense of your own identity, then there are going to be lots of concealments. And rather than sort of taking a hatchet and whomp through a turnip, we call them something else, don't you?
Oh, turnip, yeah.
Oh, okay, you know what I mean, turnip, fine. It's a bit more like peeling an onion layer by layer. And that's got to be more fun.
Well, that fits very neatly with the this idea of the tension about somebody who disappears and comes back, well, disappears, but goes out for the day and comes back, and what were they really doing, and so on. And
well, just how little we do know each other. And so much of the Victorian period is still relevant to today. Our social issues, some of our values, some of our problems.
Excuse me. That particular analogy reminded me of one of my favorite authors, Arthur Conan Doyle, in The Man with the Twisted Lip, where the fellow would go out to business during the course of the day, and he would come home at night, and they lived in a fairly decent home and so on, until one day his wife saw him in a very rough part of London and realized that, well, she thought he'd been kidnapped. Anyway, it all ended up that he was making a living begging on the streets, that he'd lost his job
So
in the
what
city.
else is new, I'm afraid?
But yeah, he was
Yes.
making a better living doing that.
Yes.
But she had no idea. He would come home and he was dressed in the normal
His city
business clothes
suit,
and so
yes.
on. So
Good
it was
story, that one.
all those
Yes.
layers of things. Do you keep, of all the characters that you've created, do you keep sort of biographical sheets on them so that you can keep them all straight?
I do, and I've never bothered to look at it. If I can't remember them, I can't really hope that other people can. I may even have contradicted myself a few times, I don't know. I know that Great Aunt Vespasia has got to be a lot older than I've allowed her to be. I had meant her to be a walk-on character, and I introduced her in 1882 or 3 or 4 or something, at being 81. And I now am up to 1890, and she's still only about 83, 84. I know I can't count. I mean, I can count, I just choose not to.
I think that's a fairly common thing, though, with mystery writers
I
and their
just don't want
characters.
to
They age very
let
slowly.
go of her.
Yeah.
Yes, but the others are aging as time passes.
Oh,
and all
proper
my
sequence.
contemporary, my fashions change, my political events and social events change. And the social problems, and we're coming up into the age of a great furor in women's role. But Aunt Vespasia is not getting any older because I just can't bear to part with her.
That sounds marvelous. On that same order, I was curious about William Monk. Do you know all about him? Or
No.
do you learn as you go along
I
with
learn
him?
as I go along, and as I think of new ideas of things for him to discover about himself, and situations that will arise in his past that will give him tension and cause for thought, and explore ethical questions about oneself and other people, because most of us, we tend to excuse ourselves for what we do because we know why we did it. And in most cases, it seemed to us to be reasonable at the time. And if you think of all the things you've ever done, perhaps in hindsight some of them were a little ugly, but at the time, it was your best judgment of what was a fair thing to do. But if you hadn't known why you'd done what you'd done, and you've just looked at it outside and think, well, I have done this, but I don't know why, you don't have the justification, and it's quite different. And he's being forced to look at himself in the way that we normally look at others. And that's what I'm trying to think. First of all, he's searching for this person who committed the terrible crime, and it's someone out there. But eventually he has to come face to face with himself. And that, I think, is something we might all contemplate at one time or another.
That provides such a wonderful kind of balancing of the two tensions. You know, his particular search for what's going on in his own particular life, or has gone in his particular life, and the search for the criminal, whoever is.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
And to realize that the person who may have done something even quite terrible is not other and out there and different. Everybody is part of us. I suppose that's what I'm trying to say. There's no us and them, it's all us.
From a pragmatic point of view, I was curious, since you balance the two series, you write 2 books a year, right?
Yes. And 2 extra.
And 2 extra?
Well, next year I've got a fantasy coming. No, next year, 95, I've got a fantasy coming out, all things going as they should. And 96, I've got a story set in the French Revolution coming out, as well as the mysteries.
Goodness.
I like to write. Well, these are stories I've had in mind or in heart for a long time, and fortunately my publisher has agreed to take them as well.
Well, that's great. That's great.
I think the French Revolution is a fascinating period.
Oh, it is indeed. It is indeed.
And there's nothing anybody could think of more bizarre than what really happened.
Yeah, I think of all the histories that have been written, I don't think anybody's really going to fully understand the clamor and the horror and the whole bit that went on in that period of time. So you can.
But let's give it a good try.
Oh yes, let imagination, take us off, and it's probably a lot closer.
There's also a lot that's known of that period of time. A great deal that's known, even to the weather on a particular day, and what famous historical people were wearing to this event or that, and a lot of what was said. In translation, as far as I'm concerned, but it is known.
I also read somewhere that you were planning at one time an American, like a saga of an American family in the 1800s. Did that ever?
No, it didn't. I don't think I know enough. It's not my roots, not my background. I thought about it and decided that I really wasn't competent to do that. I think there are a lot of other people, native-born Americans, who are much more competent, who would do a far better job than I could.
So what's your fantasy about then? The one you're writing, anyway.
Pardon?
The one you're writing, anyway.
It is finished. It
Okay.
is delivered. I suppose it's a search for truth. It starts off, the best way to describe it would be very briefly. It begins when the funeral cortege of the Ice Ark is going towards the necropolis, and this young woman who's the heroine, she sees a woman standing by a rough grave in the desert at the side of the road, and there is terrible grief in this woman's body, just devastating grief. And Tathea, my heroine, as the title, she leaves the cortege and she goes up to this woman, and after a few moments she says, "You must have loved him very, very deeply." And the woman says, "No, I didn't love him at all. In fact, I didn't even like him." I said, "Well, why do you grieve so terribly?" Because he had one life in which to devote himself to seeking for the truth, to finding it, to be brave, to declare it and to defend it. He had one chance in which to learn how to love, to pour out himself for others, to learn to give and to forgive. And he didn't do it. Nobody is richer because he lived, and nobody is poorer because he's gone. Therefore I grieve for him. And that is real tragedy. And Tathea says, well, what was the purpose of his life? What happens now to his soul, his spirit? The woman says, I don't know. More than anything else on earth, I wish I did, but I don't. And at that point she decides, I must know. Whatever it cost, I must find out what is the purpose of the whole of this existence. Not just being comfortable from day to day, even doing good things that fade and pass. What is the purpose? And she sets out to find it. And she goes on a spiritual journey where she does find what I believe to be the truth, which is that every human being is a child of God and ultimately can become like him if you will take up that burden of the journey of growth, which can be very painful, and it can at times be lonely and discouraging and hard, because you have to grow up and you have to take responsibility for who and what you are. And she brings that truth back to her own people, and they want it like a hole in the head, because it's very painful, it's very hard truth. And it's what she does with this and who she teaches and what happens. It's accepted by some, rejected by some, and ultimately there's a certain darkness which comes. It is abused, and she tries to take it back where she found it, and the angel who gave it to her, an angel being someone who has not yet had his mortal life, says, I'm sorry you stole the fire of truth from heaven. You cannot give it back. I will seal it until someone else comes who's worthy to open it, and you will guard it. And that may be 100 years, and it may be 1,000, but you will wait. And she does, and 500 years later comes the second of the trilogy. And then after that will come Armageddon, the last of the trilogy. When she and the angel with whom she loved in the beginning, he takes his mortal life, and they will fight until total destruction and the resurrection of the earth. I get enthused about this. You shouldn't ask me, I tell you.
No, I can see why. It's marvelous, and it's lovely the way you describe it.
Thank you. I do care about it very much indeed.
I'm certainly going to look forward to it when it comes out. Now, the first volume is due out in 95?
That's right.
And the second one projected for 96?
Well, I don't know. I think the French Revolution one will be 96, which is also just completed just before I left home on the 1st of the month. I don't know when the second one will be, but I shall be rooting for it. It's written.
It sounds marvelous. It really does
Thank
sound
you.
marvelous. I'm surprised that with all of the different series, the French Revolution and the fantasy and the two mystery series, that you managed to keep everything straight. How do you
Perhaps
actually work? Yes, you could end up with the pits in the French Revolution or something.
My working day?
Yeah.
I get up between 7 and 8, sort of depending. And first thing I do is get dressed and then go and take the dogs. I have 3 fairly large dogs. My puppy, who's 11 months old, last weighed in at 84 pounds.
Oh my goodness.
I take the dogs for a long walk up the field. Then I come back, have breakfast, and start to work. I would like to be at work by 8:30 or 9 at the latest. My secretary comes in at 10, and we work separately, otherwise we talk. She's also a good friend. And stop for lunch, and she leaves at about 3, and I'll probably take a break, walk the dogs again, and work until 5 or 6, and if I'm on a hot streak, go back after supper and work in the evenings. But usually I'll stop and put my feet up and watch television, which I enjoy, and knit. I love to knit.
Do you?
Yes, and I also like to garden in the summer. I have about 3/4 of an acre, all hacked out of a field, so it's only 2 or 3 years old. A lot to do yet.
Sounds and all in the Scottish Highlands.
Yes, overlooking the sea. I can sit up in bed and see the sea in the mountains. It's tough, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. It sounds just so envious.
Real hard life.
Yes, when you walk out here and
Yes.
see a parking lot. It's
I usually work 6 days a week.
6 days a week.
Yes.
Okay.
I really enjoy what I do, and I've worked a long time to get to the point where people will take as many books as this, so I've got all sorts of ideas stored up, and life's not going to be long enough, I don't think.
Do you have, other than the things that you've described, what other kinds of
Oh.
projects have you in mind?
I've got one on the Spanish Inquisition, from the Inquisitor's point of view. Starting out by believing that he is saving souls, and coming gradually to the conclusion that every human being has the free agency and the God-given right to believe what they will. And if it's what he agrees with, fine, and if it's what he doesn't agree with, that's fine too. And of course, that's the greatest heresy of all. That is written, and maybe one day I'll have a publisher for it. You asked. Sorry.
Yes, no, it reminds me of a book, and I apologize to the author, I cannot remember the title or her, but she wrote a book about the Nazi Germany period, and it's in 2 parts, and the first part is from the point of view of a commandant of
How
a
interesting.
prisoner of war camp, and
Yes.
the second part is from the point of view of one of the prisoners. But she put the commandant first because she wanted to present even
Yes.
the Germans as people believing they were doing the right thing at the right
I
time.
admire that sort of writing very much. Well, actually, my Inquisitor is a hero. He really is the hero because he comes to this realization, and then, of course, it's going to cost him desperately dear. And if you see the Inquisition against the light of civil or criminal law of its own time, it's not as appalling as it would be to us, who are used to... I mean, criminal trials at that time were tried by combat, and they burned witches and things. So it's not quite as extraordinary as it would seem to us. But why I think it's still relevant is because these days we don't tend to persecute people so much for their religious belief, but my goodness, we can do for their political belief. The innate sense in most of us that we know better than other people what's right for them.
It does seem to be a very prevalent...
It's part of human nature.
Yeah.
We always have this tendency to believe that our own beliefs are, obviously we believe they're right, but also that we have some sort of right or obligation to press them on other people. And I think we don't.
As you say, it's something that has spread through history.
You can preach and teach and exhort, but when you've done all that you can, if the person still chooses to believe differently, providing they're not contravening the law and injuring others, then it doesn't matter how much you love them or how much you would like them to see things as you see it. They have the right to see it differently.
This sounds like a good segue into this last question. We're wrapping up time. Seeing things differently, what kind of advice would you give for a writer, a new writer, a novice writer who wants to perhaps break into the mystery field? To take a new view of something, or?
Write what you really want to write and get a good agent.
And get a good agent.
Yes. An agent can make the difference between being taken seriously by a publisher and not being really being read at all. But some people say write what you know. I'd say write what you care about. I don't know Victorian London. I mean, I've had to learn it.
I was going to say, a lot of people would probably disagree with you on that point.
Well,
think
I know it only because
now.
I've had to learn it.
Yeah.
I wasn't around.
Well,
But-
on that, excuse me, but we should
Write what you
probably
care
wrap.
about.
So I want to
enjoyed it.
thank you very
Thank you.
much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very
Thank you
much. Conversation with a friend.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.